Good. Hey, Sarah, how you doing? Hello there. Hi, are you able to hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, excellent. All right, good. I hear you as well, so I think we are all good. So we're gonna get started in just a couple minutes, all right?
Okay, sounds good.
All right.
Should I test my clip?
Yeah, hang on just 1 second. Make host. All right. I think that should do it.
All right, here we go. Just make sure the sound's working.
There's an incredible insight to be gained to know that you can.
Is the sound working?
Yeah, sound is good.
Okay, sweet.
All right, good. I'll see you in just a minute.
Okay.
Okay, hello, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Jonathan Lipp. I'm director of the Big Apple Film Festival. And we are very excited about our guest today. We have Sarah Moshman with us. Sarah is right there. Hello, Sarah, how are you?
Hi everyone.
All right, good to see you. So Sarah is a filmmaker, documentary filmmaker, Emmy Award winner. She has been a TED speaker, and she's been featured on CNN, Good Morning America, amongst many others. Her feature documentary, The Empowerment Project, Ordinary Women Doing Extraordinary Things, screened over 700 times around the United States, distributed by Indieflix. And her second film, Losing Sight of Shore, was also distributed. It was on Netflix, and now it's available on Apple TV. And she's also an author. Her new book is called Empowered Filmmaking, which is now available on Amazon. So that's my brief intro. I'm going to turn it over to Sarah, and just going to ask her for a brief introduction, and then we're going to check out quickly the trailer of her feature film, Losing Sight of Shore. So let's start first, Sarah. If you want to just tell us a little about your background.
Hi everyone. Yes, thank you for having me today. My name is Sarah Moshman. I'm a documentary filmmaker, as John said. I've made 3 feature-length documentaries. I grew up in the Chicago area, went to film school, University of Miami in Florida, then moved out to Los Angeles about 13 years ago. I did the reality TV thing for a while, so I worked on Dancing with the Stars for 10 seasons as a field producer on that show, so kind of operating as like a one-woman band. So filming and interviewing and not dancing in the rehearsal studios for the 2-minute packages that would air live before the actual live performance. So you'd like get a peek into what the rehearsal was like. So I really kind of cut my teeth in production doing that and working on cooking shows and other dancing shows and MTV, Lifetime, Bravo, Food Network, all those networks. And then in 2013, I really had a hunger to tell my own stories again, like to have that film school feeling, and the feeling that I hope all of you have in some form, which is like, what do I want to create? What do I want to say to the world? What kind of work do I wish existed that doesn't yet? And so that's really was my impetus for making The Empowerment Project, which was my first feature-length documentary. after having made some short documentaries. Yeah, so I set off across the country and interviewed inspirational women from all different career fields, from like a pilot to an athlete, astronaut, mathematician, all these women's stories that you've never heard before, simply because the media doesn't choose to focus on stories like that. And I felt like, okay, I have enough skills in my toolkit. Maybe I can be the one to tell these stories and not wait for the phone to ring, not wait around for this perfect opportunity. I think I can create it myself. And so that film was a huge education for me to learn everything from coming up with an idea, developing it, fundraising, crowdfunding, bringing on investors, grant writing, all of it, all the way through production and editing, and then marketing and distribution. And with that film, we've done a lot of educational distribution. So we've been screening it for the past 7 years, oh my gosh, in schools, groups, and organizations all over the world. So it's been a great revenue and great impact all together. So just because I say educational doesn't mean we're not making any money, because we are, we have. And so that film just taught me a ton. And so coming into my second film, Losing Sight of Shore, which is about 4 women who rowed a boat across the entire Pacific Ocean. I'm going to share the trailer with you in a moment. That one is probably the bulk of what we'll talk about today, because that film, to cut to the chase, ended up on Netflix, but it was quite a journey to get it there, and very difficult, and a lot of bumps along the way. And so that film had a little bit a wider audience. It was in 190 countries on Netflix, subtitled in 25 languages. It was an acquisition to Netflix, so I still own all the rights to it, which is important to distinguish. And so that film taught me a ton, again, about how to fundraise, how to bring on investors, how to do all of this, and then how to effectively pitch and sell or license your film to one of these major streamers, and beyond. And then briefly, I'll mention my latest film is called Nevertheless. It's all about sexual harassment in the workplace. I started working on it when I was 8 months pregnant with my daughter. I now have two kids. And that film, always by design, was meant to start conversations in workplaces, in schools. So for that film, we're working with the same distributor as I worked with for the Empowerment Project, my first film. And we're going this like corporation route, where we are showing Nevertheless in corporations as like a film-based program and curriculum. And the streamer part, the digital distribution, will come later. But really our main focus is impact with a film like that, when there's so much to unpack and talk about. So we have a whole discussion guide and all that. So that's a lot. But basically, I think today we're going to hone in on Losing Sight of Shore. So I'm going to share the trailer with you the trailer for that one, so that you have some context of what I'm talking about. But happy to answer questions about any of the films or any of the paths. But I think just in the interest of time today, we're going to focus mainly on that. So let me share my screen, and I'll share with you the trailer.
There's an incredible insight to be gained, to know that you can fight and overcome anything that is thrown your way.
The main reason is to test myself, to see what I'm capable of.
The story of why we're here and why we're doing it for breast cancer. You think life's too short and you really do have to live it, and that's why we're doing what we're doing.
154 days to go.
We haven't seen the sunshine in about a week.
You only have one life, so you might as well make the most of it.
Jesus is here!
The girls aren't going to break any records. They're actually going to establish records, because this has never been done before.
The quote goes that you can never cross an ocean unless you have the courage to lose sight of the shore. And that's where your real achievements lie. There's a battery fire and we lost the MPPT box.
I believe that everyone has their own Pacific to cross.
Okay, so that's Losing Sight of Shore. So that's the film we'll be talking about a little bit today. John, would you like me to talk more about that, or do you have a question?
So I know, so that film was on Netflix, so, and now it's on Apple TV. Is that right?
I suppose if we're calling iTunes Apple TV
iTunes.
now.
Yeah, iTunes, right.
It's iTunes. It's not like Apple TV Plus licensed it. It's like transactional on iTunes. It was on Amazon, but I might have gotten pulled from Amazon US in the big dump that they recently did. We just made a deal with DirecTV, so we're on DirecTV channel 104 for the next year. And we've got a lot of international deals going for it. So it's been a really great case study, honestly, of like Netflix was the big dream and it was amazing. And I got to pay all my investors back and pay myself finally. And it was just this wonderful situation. Of course, it has its headaches as well, which I'm happy to share. But 3 years, we were on Netflix for 3 years as an acquisition. So it's not a Netflix original, meaning I still own all the rights to it, and they licensed it from me to be on their platform for 3 years. And you kind of think, okay, that was it, we did it. But there's still so much more life in a movie like this. And if you're willing to put in the time and do the research and work with great distributors that care about your project, it doesn't end there. You know, Netflix is not the only game in town. It's perhaps the biggest game in town. But I've been really pleasantly surprised to see that there's still so much more life for the film, even after Netflix. So that's encouraging, I think.
Yeah, all right, thank you. Yeah, so I guess, you know, the main thing, of course, I guess, is Netflix. I want to try to, focus on that, but, as well as the other streaming platforms. But I think the big question is, strategies for getting onto Netflix. So let me first start. If anybody has any questions or wants to tell us a bit about their project, and then follow up with a question, you could type it in the chat box, or you could just literally just raise your hand and go ahead and ask your question. So if anybody wants to jump in here and
I'll start.
Okay.
Hi, I just realized my name doesn't show properly. I'm Eunice Chapon, and Sarah, I love that trailer. I'm definitely gonna have to check that out. I love those types of stories. We share a common theme, which is inspired stories about strong women. I'm a 50-something-year-old attorney that's been in the financial sector for a long time, and I've been writing stories that focus on strong women succeeding in the workplace, and kind of the challenges of dealing with a white male bureaucracy and things like that. So I would definitely love to hear how you're getting interest in your stories, the navigation that you had to do in order to get onto the Netflix platform. But also, I'm kind of curious because I know there's so much discussion right now about diversity and hearing more diverse voices, how you've been able to maybe, parlay that, or has that hurt you or helped you in any ways? So I'm sorry, that's a lot of questions right there, but it's nice to meet you.
Yeah, you too, and I'm so glad you're here. Yeah, so a little bit of backstory about Losing Sight of Shore. So it's important to understand that like this project and me would never go together. Like really, I am not an athlete. I love to exercise, but I'm not an athlete. I know nothing about rowing. I still don't. I think that's what honestly attracted me to this idea, is that if I had been pitching myself to direct a film like this, nobody would have ever picked me for it. And I think that's what excited me about it, is that I wasn't the right fit for it. And what could I bring to it that was different? And so basically this was January 2015, I had finished my first feature-length documentary, was out touring with it, like finally like, okay, my film's done, I can breathe, like how am I gonna distribute it? So it's sort of in the weeds on that. And then as these projects never come at a convenient time, it's never like the right time when these things happen. But this woman emailed me and said, I just heard about these 4 women who are about to row across the Pacific Ocean. I thought you might want to know about it. And it was like, what? People do that? This was so not my world. And what's interesting about that is like, I could have just walked right on by, right? I could have been like, that's crazy. Anyway, I'm busy over here. But something about that idea really spoke to me. And I was like, I want to learn more. Like, sure, but surely someone is already telling this story. I think we all assume like someone else has jumped in and is going to do it. ESPN must be all over this. And so I agreed to Skype with 2 of the rowers the next day, and with no expectation. And by the end of that Skype, I was just totally blown away, and also sad to hear that no one was telling this story, right? They were going to be leaving in 3 months from that call, and that there was no plan to capture this at all. And I thought, what a tragedy that would be if they do this, you know, record setting, you know, world record breaking, whatever row, and that there would be no, you know, document of it, even just on a personal level, like just as a filmmaker, just not telling that story. So I had no idea how I was going to make this film, or how I would pull it off, or how it would work, or if anyone would want to watch it. But something about it really spoke to me. And I thought, if this is interesting to me, someone that doesn't even know anything about rowing, then surely this story might be interesting to other people too. And that's a good place to start. It's like, if something piques your interest, then surely it will pique other people's interests as well. So no more than 3 months later, I was standing on the dock in San Francisco, watching them row away, you know, and like crying my eyes out because I just couldn't believe it was happening. And so the way it worked is I supplied them with cameras and microphones and hard drives on the boat so they could tell their own story at sea for the most part. And then I met them on land along the way, where I would interview them and be with them as they would like eat huge cheeseburgers and like take their first steps on land and like process what had happened to them and decide if they wanted to keep going or not. So it was this whole journey, which is, you know, a whole other seminar, I suppose. But I initially started by funding this myself, which was very scary. I just had no time. Like, there was only 3 months between when I found out they existed and when I was standing on the dock. So that urgency actually really helps me as a filmmaker, as an entrepreneur. Not everyone operates well that way, but I operate very well under like, this is happening whether you're ready or not, you know, and then you just have to rise to the occasion. When there's no deadline, like if they had said like in 2 years, we're thinking about going, I would have been like, cool. And there's no way I would have done it. Like, it was just like, this is happening. There's a story. It's in your lap. Do you want it? Okay, let's go. And so there's just no time to crowdfund. So even though I had done crowdfunding before, I'm a huge fan. I've done 2 successful campaigns. I can also talk about that at length. I didn't have time for that. It takes so much planning and preparation. And so I invested what money I had in the cameras, the hard drives, the microphones to just get them going. And then I had to figure out how to fund it as they were at sea. So it's kind of like the ultimate motivator, because they're literally out there rowing 24 hours a day, 2 hours on, 2 hours off, for what ended up to be 9 months. And so to say that was motivating is an understatement, because I'm sitting here dry in my office, not rowing in the oceans, and just like all of a sudden I've just got to raise enough money to meet them in Hawaii. And then I've got to raise enough money to meet them in Samoa and then Australia. So I didn't really ever do a formal crowdfunding campaign. I did some what I call casual crowdfunding, where I was sort of always eliciting donations to our website. I brought on investors, like a husband and wife team that I had no idea were film investors. Like, investors are very elusive. It's not like you go to one event or one website and you're like, hi, I need investors. It's very sort of mysterious in that way. But basically I was pitching Losing Sight of Shore all over the place to production companies, whatever contacts I had, which were pretty limited, saying like, this is an amazing story and it's happening right now and I need the funding to get to the next step. Like, I was just pitching it like crazy. And there was no shortage of interest. Everybody I talked to about it, everybody was like, wow, people do that? That's amazing. I can't wait to watch that. And it was like, yeah, okay. And then nobody's writing me a check, you know, like, it just was maddening to have this incredible story unfolding literally in real time, and yet to have no support and to feel so alone in it, you know. I felt crazy a lot of the time, actually. But so I brought on these investors, this husband and wife couple that worked in reality TV, and they were like looking to get into the doc world as like executive producers. And so they wrote me a $50,000 check, which was huge. And that helped. I made sure that money got me through the rest of the shoot. So I was so scrappy. I took on tons of roles on my own. My husband, who's not a cinematographer, not in the business at all, we bought a drone. We went to the park every day and we learned how to use it. And then he was my drone operator in Samoa, you know, like just stuff like that. You just make it happen. And I applied for several grants. I was rejected by, I think, 10 grants before I got my first one. And it wasn't until we were in post. And you're just like, this is maddening. Like, how do people raise money for these films? Because you need the money now, and yet they don't want to give you the money till you're at that point, you know? So it's really, really tough. And it took a lot of faith. And remember, Netflix isn't even part of this conversation yet. Like, I didn't get the deal with Netflix until the film was done. So it was really, really hard. But one thing that really helped me was one of the grants I got was from the Tribeca Film Institute, which sadly I think is defunct due to the pandemic, but there are plenty of labs and other grants to look at and apply for. But they had a program called the All Access program. So it was a $10,000 grant, which totally great, obviously, but not a ton of money, isn't going to move the needle a ton for any film. But what's better is that they brought me to New York and I was able to pitch Losing Sight of Shore to investors, to financiers, to distribution companies, festival programmers. They put me in this like marketplace, and it was like speed dating for distribution. So I pitched Losing Sight of Shore like 30 times in 2 days to all these different meetings they had like set me up with. And that was hugely helpful. And by then they had made it and we were in post. So it was like the best feeling of like pitching something that is great and you have it. Like, it wasn't this idea of like, if they make it, it'll be great. It was like, they made it, it's incredible, I have the footage, it's safe, like it was so fun to pitch at that point. And so, yeah, that led to a sales agent. So I met with a film sales company through that program, and they said, well, let us know when you have a rough cut. Like, you're just never there. They're never like, okay, great. Like, they're like, great, let us know when you have a rough cut. And you're like, what? Like, it's just like the finish line keeps getting moved, So you're like, okay, once they make it, then everyone's going to write me a check. And it's like, okay, they're like, okay, great, let us know when you have a rough cut. So you're like, but so I followed up with them when I finally had a rough cut, got some other grants, was able to keep funding it. And yeah, so I shared it with a potential sales agent when I had a rough cut, and they were like, this is great, we totally see how to sell this, like, we'd like to rep the project. And so basically then I had a sales agent, which was hugely helpful, because Netflix, just keep in mind, like, Netflix is not picking up the phone for every filmmaker. Like, that's impossible. It's a massive company. They're dealing with preferred vendors, like preferred production companies, sales agents that know the inner workings of Netflix and also the larger marketplace. So it makes a lot of sense in some cases to work with a sales agent that can get their call answered much quicker than you ever could and knows how to negotiate. So yeah, my sales agent, once the film was done, sent it to Netflix, like HBO, Amazon, National Geographic, Discovery. There was like a bunch of them. And I had no expectation. I had no idea. At this point, I'm exhausted. I'm 2 years in. I haven't been paid a penny. I have no idea if anyone's going to like this movie. Like, I'm really proud of it, but, who knows? So Netflix was my, number one choice, dream of all dreams, biggest footprint in terms of streamer. And so, yeah, it happened pretty quickly. My sales agent sent it to Netflix, and within, I want to say like a week, we had an offer. Wow. Which was incredible. And my story is unique in the sense that I did not have a celebrity executive producer on board, which is what so many people say you need. We got rejected from Sundance. In fact, we got rejected by Tribeca, the very film festival that gave me the grant and the marketplace. So like, it's all just it's all ridiculous. So I did not get into any major film festivals. There was no like deadline article about me, none of that. And we still made a great sale, so it's a testament to story wins. This was an incredible, once in a lifetime, extraordinary story. And Netflix saw that. And so, yeah, they agreed to license it for 3 years. Now, that's an important distinction. As I mentioned, it's not a Netflix original, so they didn't buy it outright. They do not own all the rights to it. If you're a Netflix original, they own all the rights to it. You cannot distribute it in any other fashion unless you've agreed to that previously. This was a licensing deal, so they agreed to license the film worldwide for 3 years. So now it's no longer on Netflix. I own it, and I'm doing other things with it. And just one second, for your question, just 1 second. Basically, it's just important to note that Netflix is changing a lot. So this was in 2016, 2017. I was on May 1st, 2017 to May 1st, 2020. Netflix has changed a lot in that time. So they're not acquiring as many films now because the name of the game with this streaming wars is that everyone wants their own original content so that you won't leave them and go to a different streaming platform. So there, as you'll see on Netflix, the little N or Netflix original means they own all the rights to that series or television show or film. So deals like mine are becoming a lot more rare because they want to own all the rights to something. So just keep that in mind as we talk today, that this was 3 years ago and the landscape changes constantly.
Yeah.
What's your question?
Was that your choice that you didn't want them to acquire it? Like, did they ask to acquire it and you were like, nah, I want the rights to my film for years to come so I can decide what to do with it? Or was that
I was open to either at that point. I mean, certainly if they own all the rights to it, they're going to pay a higher price for it. But the originals team, I guess, watched it first and said no thanks and kicked it to the acquisitions team. And the acquisitions team was like, yeah, we'll take it. And then at the end of the 3 years, I was like, oh, are they going to re-up their license? Like, what's going to happen? And my sales agent was like, oh, they never do that. They never up their license, which I've heard since has happened. So of course, there's always exceptions to the rule, but for the most part, Netflix doesn't re-up their license for something unless it was like wildly popular or there's like a new thing based on it. And that's a frustrating part of working with any major streamer is you're never going to see the data for how many people watched it, especially as an acquisition. So like a Stranger Things, for example, they might brag like, oh, 40 million people watched Stranger Things in the first weekend. They might give these like big numbers of their top, watched series, but you are never going to hear from them like, oh, guess what? 1 million people watched your film. Like, cause that gives you power to say like, great, I deserve XYZ. So that's really frustrating as the filmmaker for me to not know how many people watched it, where they're watching it, how much of it they're watching. Did they watch it more than once? So my social media is the most important metric for me because I hear from people all the time being like, oh my God, I just watched it, or I've watched it 6 times, or I shared it with all my friends. And my website, losingsideofshore.com, which is nowhere advertised on Netflix whatsoever, it crashed the day that we went up on Netflix. So it was like 600,000 people went to our website, which is like a whole extra step, right? And so that's a metric for me to be like, oh, wow, okay, people are really paying attention all of a sudden. And like, I had to get more bandwidth on my website, but that's a really frustrating part of working with these streamers is they don't share their data. And then the other frustrating part is if you're an acquisition, like I was, they're going to do literally zero marketing that your film is on their platform. So the only marketing they will do is algorithmic marketing, meaning if you're already prone to watching films just like this one, which unfortunately means if you watch films about extreme sports, which yes, technically this is an extreme sport, but that's, again, as I mentioned, so not what the movie's about. It's about like the power of the human spirit and friendship and, female empowerment and like all of this great stuff. But because Netflix categorized it as a sports documentary, as, these like keywords that they use, then only people that watch films with already those keywords or those interests are the only people that are going to know that it's there. And so, yes, it's amazing to be on Netflix. Don't get me wrong, dream come true, but there certainly are drawbacks as well. And so even 3 years on the platform, it was like maddening when people would be like, oh, I've never heard of this, or like, this movie was perfect for me. Why didn't I know about it? Or like, we had so little budget for marketing and PR. It's like, yes, we're on the biggest platform, but if people don't know that it's there, then it just gets lost, So I ended up getting my own billboard. I like paid for my own billboard in Los Angeles because I was like, okay, Netflix is not going to get me a billboard. So I'm just going to get my own. And it was awesome and super empowering to like walk down the street and be like, there's my billboard. And, some people heard about it that way. And it was just really like recognizing that even when you get the thing, you still have to be your own biggest fan. You have to be, pushing your film. People aren't just going to automatically know that it's there, especially when Netflix is not spending millions of dollars on an advertising campaign for you.
Adrian, you had a question?
Hi. Hey, thank you so much. I did see your trailer on the empowerment project. I thought that was really great. I have twin 2-year-old daughters, so I'm really looking forward to sort of sharing that with them both. What I was questioning is what was your strategy to sort of market it and seek out investors, because it sounded like you went to you said production companies and various other groups to sort of solicit, their engagement for a variety of things. What was your strategy? How did you know who to go to, and what was your strategy there?
Yeah, and we're talking about Losing Sight of Shore still.
Just that, or any of your projects, I guess.
Yeah.
All three, perhaps.
Well, I think it starts with access. So with Losing Sight of Shore, I had an agreement with the rowers that I was the only person able to tell this story. So that's like step one, right? So that, no one could really step in and tell the story anyway, because they were in the middle of the ocean. Like, how could they get them equipment that I had already, that would have been a mess. But in general, you sort of need to kind of plant your foot in the sand and say, like, I'm Adrian, this is a story that I'm telling and only I can tell it. And whether that means it's your own personal story or you have the access or the life rights for something. I think that's, with Losing Sight of Shore, that was very important, because that was my whole value, is being like, they're out there and they're using my cameras and they're gonna give me the footage and I'm the one telling the story. So that gives you like a confidence and a power and the IP, as they call it, intellectual property, to go to production companies and say, like, if you want to help tell this story, then it's got to be with me. And like, here's my vision, here's what I'm doing. So it's funny, it's like hard to say now because I know so much more, but in hindsight, I can tell you, you should go to all the production companies that make films like the one you want to make, like who's in this realm, who's in this part of culture, who's telling stories that you're excited about. So you could say, I loved this film that you guys made last year. Guess what? I'm making one that's similar, and here's how I think we can work together. Like, make sure you're clear about what value they bring. Like, maybe you don't need them. Like, I didn't end up working with any production company on all three of my films. And I tried, it just never made sense financially, or the deal wouldn't make sense. But truthfully, at the time with Losing Sight of Shore, I wasn't that clear-headed about it. It was just like, okay, who do I know? Like, I had such a smaller network, and it was like, what production companies do I have any access to? And so I ended up kind of pitching it to production companies that didn't necessarily make sense for it on paper, and then ultimately didn't make sense overall. But you just also never know. Like, some of these reality TV production companies, for example, might want to start getting into documentary, and maybe your project is the first one they can help with.
But you're like literally picking up the phone, making a list of production companies that do similar type of projects, and you're saying, like, literally cold calling.
Yeah, or if you have any kind of connection, always start there. So like, if like, I worked on a bunch of reality shows, so it's like all these production companies helped make those reality shows. So I'm calling a former coworker and being like, hey, can you connect me with the director of whatever at that company, and I can pitch it to them. And in hindsight, that didn't make a ton of sense, right? Like, because reality TV companies aren't really making documentaries, but it also helped me hone my pitch and get really good at what I was doing.
Yeah.
And also helped me realize what I didn't want, because I would ask about the structure of the deal. I'd be like, okay, if we did work together, what would that look like? Like, if you help, are you going to help me raise money, or are you guys giving me the money? Like, it was also just like an education in how that works. And honestly, it just never made sense for that project, because I kept getting further and further. Like, they're out there in the Pacific. So like, honestly, the further I got and the further they got, literally, the more it was like, does this even make sense to give up any equity in what I'm doing and share ownership creatively with a company that hasn't been with me from the start? And like, is that money really worth it? So it frustratingly ended up just being like, bootstrapping it made the most sense, like piecing it all together between my investment, my investors, crowdfunding, grants. Like, I just cobbled it all together. And that ended up serving me very well, because then when I made the deal with Netflix, I was able to pay everyone back. If my budget had been $1 million, which I wanted it to be, of course, I wouldn't have made my money back. So it just depends on where you're at, and make sure you're getting into the right partnership. It's really a marriage, right? Like, I'm still talking about Losing Sight of Shore six years later, okay? And I'm trying to turn it into a narrative film now. Like, it's still such a part of my life. And so like, you're going to be married to this production company for the entire life cycle of a project. It has to be right. It has to make sense. And also, you have to respect them creatively and their taste. Whenever I, would meet with these reality TV production companies, it was like, well, what kind of notes are they really going to be giving me? Like, they don't make documentaries, so I don't want this to like be stuffed into some box that it's not. So you know, these projects take so long and take so much of your life and time. You have to really enjoy it as much as you can. And if you're going to be working with, you know, people that don't respect your ideas, then that's no good. So.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Anybody else want to just raise your hand, or if you want to put a question in the chat box? All right.
Yeah, hi. I had a question. You talked about sales agent, and maybe like this might be a silly question in that the answer might just be in the title, but like what distinguishes like a sales agent from like another type of agent, or from like managers? Like I guess like what did that relationship look like, and how was it different than maybe other similar either representation or kind of mentorship, what have you, type relationships that you've had?
Yeah, I would say I don't have like an agent. I have a manager kind of, but like a sales agent, I would distinguish as someone you're going to work with when you have a project to sell. Like you're done with a project, you're ready to sell it, versus an agent in the traditional sense is going to be more like helping you package something to get it going. That's kind of my layman's definition of it, I guess. I think of sales agent as someone you bring on when you're close to done or done with a project. That's not true across the board with all sales agents, but to me, that's how I kind of think of it. I was sort of against it at first because of the Tribeca program I mentioned, I was able to meet with myself with HBO. I had a contact at Amazon. Like this is all just cobbled together. Like I'm not a super well-connected like Hollywood person, but over time you're like, oh, you work for Amazon? Cool. And then like 2 years later, you're like, can I send you my film? Like you just have to like just bring in your people, like start to get to know people. This whole business operates on that, you know, for better or for worse. So I was a little bit like, what do I need a sales agent for? I have the contact to the HBO acquisitions director. Like, cool, I'm going to send it to him myself. Like, I'm very, you know, scrappy in that way. So I've seen both sides. So basically, I actually sent Losing Sight of Short my rough cut, which I wouldn't recommend in hindsight, to HBO, Amazon, and Sony Pictures Classics, because I had met with all three of them myself in person at this Tribeca film market. And so my reasoning was like, why should I give some agent X amount of percent when I've got the contact myself? I thought it was really that simple. And I sent it to those three as a rough cut because I needed funding. I was super excited. You just want to like sell the film. You just want to know you're going to have a home for it. And of course, all three of those turned it down, and like Sony watched it immediately. Amazon took like 2 weeks, and HBO took 3 months to watch it and say no. And they gave me very thoughtful feedback. Like it was very like, we love this and this and this about it, but it's not for us. And it was like, thanks. So, but the hard lesson I learned from that, honestly, is that you don't get a second shot at a first impression. And so the film wasn't done. Yes, the overarching journey of A to Z was there, but it wasn't color corrected. It didn't have sound editing. I didn't have the song I ended up licensing at the end. So who knows, you know, had I waited to show them a finished product, maybe they would have said yes. I mean, it's water under the bridge now. Netflix was the way to go, but I'm also glad I didn't pitch it to Netflix too soon. Like I just remember that people can't see your vision. You're like, oh, they're filmmakers, or like they work in film, they get it. It's like, no, they really don't. So like maybe show your film to a sales agent early because you're trying to get them excited and coming up with a strategy, and like they can hopefully see the vision for what it's going to be. But if we're talking with distributors, I would say, my humble opinion is to wait until your film is done. If you're like this in this indie bootstrapping mode like I was, if you're working with a production company, I'm sure it's a different thing. But for me, so I learned that the hard way, being like, oh, I've got the contacts, what do I need them for? And then it just became so apparent how valuable a sales agent can be, not for every film, not for every strategy. But my sales agent, you know, picks up the phone once, gets right through to Netflix to the right person the first time, and they had a relationship. And so him saying, and I think it's worth noting that an old white guy vouching for a young white woman's film was important. This was when like the old boys club worked in my favor, right? So he's making one phone call to Netflix and being like, I have this awesome film, you got to check it out. That means something, right? And it's not me, the filmmaker, being like, it's great, I promise. Like, it's like someone else giving you credibility and validation. And so then he could broker the deal, and he got us a much better deal with Netflix than I ever could have gotten for myself. He also negotiated the subtitling. So subtitling is really expensive, and a lot of times that falls to the filmmaker. kind of by default. And so the film had to be subtitled in 25 languages, which costs over $50,000. And he negotiated that Netflix would cover that. So like, that's something I never could have done. I would have been like, sure, whatever, sure. You know, like, okay. So he did an amazing job with that. And truth be told, you know, this guy made 15% off the sale. So sales agents range anywhere from 10 to, I guess, 20% of a sale. We had what's called a step deal. So that means, and we negotiated in our contract, me and the sales agent, based on advice I had been given. So his fee was $10,000 off the top of the sale. So not like I had to pay him $10,000 up front. You really want your sales agent to be financially motivated. There are some shady sales agents that'll be like, sure, pay me 10 grand and I'll find a home for your film. It's like, yeah, I bet you will. And it'll be on iTunes, which I could have done by myself. So like you want them to be financially motivated so that they're making calls, that they don't get paid unless you get paid. That's really important. So his rate that we negotiated was like, he made $10,000 off the top, which, you know, okay, I was like, is that normal? But other people said like sales agents like him, that's what they do. And then he got 15% of the sale. And then if the sale had reached a certain level, he would get 17.5% and then 20%. So it was like a step deal. So again, he's financially motivated to keep selling it because if he reaches a certain revenue amount, he gets more of a percent. So apparently that's pretty normal in terms of sales agents. And ultimately I was very happy with that deal. Yeah, Adrian.
May I ask, what's the best way to find a sales agent? I have a feature-length film myself that I'm in post with right now. I'm just beginning post, and I'm thinking that might be my next step, perhaps.
Yeah, I think there's a bunch of different ways. For me, it was this grant that turned into the marketplace. That's how I met them. I would look into different sales agencies and see what kind of films they're selling and then reach out. I mean, there's certainly like junior execs or assistants that you could get in touch with at each of these sales agencies, and they can be that like first level of gatekeeping to be like, or hey, this sounds really interesting. Like they want to be bringing in projects to impress their bosses. Like I would just do the research and find out, you know, which sales agency might be interested in a film like yours, and then reaching out, you know, through social media, through their website, through the junior exec on the team, you know, kind of do some sleuthing.
Sure.
I'd say the big ones are like Cinetic Media. I'll put this in the chat. Cinetic Media is the big one. Submarine. These are the ones that are like selling films at Sundance. Film sales companies who I worked with in New York. But there's a bunch of others. Yeah, I would just like, what are the films that are comp titles to yours that you admire, and how did they sell their films?
But I guess the sales agencies, are they like categorized? Like if I go to Google, can I just look up film sales agencies, or is it a certain type of category?
There might be a curated list somewhere, but like those are kind of three big ones, but there's tons more. It might be like the hardest to get in touch with these if they're like selling, you know, multi-million-dollar projects at Sundance. But yeah, it's just about finding the right fit. You want someone that's excited about your film, that gets it, that's going to go sell it. And luckily, if they're not interested, they're not going to take you on, you know, because it's just going to waste their time and yours. So I was definitely rejected by a few sales agents before I found the right one. And it's honestly because they had sold a film very similar to mine. They were like, oh, extreme sports, we got this. Like, again, with the extreme sports, where you're like, sure, whatever, call it what you want, but like, help me sell it. So they were like, oh yes, films like this do very well. We know how to sell it. Let's go. And if they don't feel that way, then don't waste your time, and they won't want to waste theirs because it's just too much work to call around and pitch things. And it's about taste, right? Your taste and theirs matching, and them seeing the value. And if they ask for any money up front, just like run away, because that's not how it works.
And just want to say, if anybody has any other questions, you know, feel free to just raise your hand. Or
hi, hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, yes. Hi, Joanna. Hello.
Hi, I'm sorry I don't have my video on. I'm in a car traveling. I didn't realize I would be, but I do have a question if I could ask.
Yeah, please.
First of all, Sarah, thank you so much. This is really great hearing all your story. I've heard you before speak, and it's just such a great journey you've been on, and very similar with myself, how I made my first feature documentary. But my question is, I'm at a point where the feature that I made, A Fine Line, we've done a lot of like corporate screenings and engagements. It premiered last spring on PBS. So we've really done a lot of grassroots. I literally created a nonprofit from it in terms of our social media impact campaign. But now I'm at a point where I'd love to try to figure out how to get it to a streamer, because I'm also developing a new, what I think could be a great series, similar content and subjects. So I was thinking it's a great way to try to sell this first doc through, excuse me, I'm just driving here, and then create a relationship to pitch them for the series that we're developing. And so I started by reaching out to some production companies. Some just weren't interested. And now finally Cinetic expressed interest, but great. I just, except I'm hesitant to send them the treatment. They didn't express interest for the doc because they thought it's already out there, and that's not how they typically work, but they are interested in the series. But I just haven't sent them the treatment yet, because I want to get more feedback from other people first, because they're my, big hope. So I don't, and a couple sales agents I reached out to pretty much had the same feedback, that because the film's been out there, it's just not for them. So I don't know if you have any feedback in the sense of either to try to find a sales agent when I'm at this stage of the film, it's already premiered. I do own a lot of the rights still. And then also the fact that it's connected, I think it could be a great way, like a 2-for-1, because of this new series I'm developing.
Yeah. So first of all, do you know Nora Poggi?
Yes, she's on my team as an impact producer.
She's a good friend of mine. I've been working with her as well on my latest film as a consultant. So I've heard a lot about you, Joanna, and I know your film, and we should continue to talk. But
oh, that'd be great.
Yeah, I guess the abridged, we can talk further, but like the abridged version, I would think it's kind of two separate journeys. I understand why you're like, oh, one can go with the other, and maybe that's true, but even in terms of departments, as you were talking, I was like, well, even in Netflix, like the people that deal with development versus the people that deal with acquisitions are like world apart. So I would just sort of think of it as two separate entities. Like, how do you want to get A Fine Line onto a streamer and then also develop the series? And if Cinetic is interested in the series, I would go with that. I mean, they certainly have a ton of connections and can really help get your project off the ground. So I wouldn't almost don't cut yourself off at the knees for the series just because you want to get the film on a streamer. I would just sort of think of it as two separate things that will, in your head, deliciously go together. But it might not go together in terms of the sale of the series. That's just sort of my gut feeling as you were talking. There's different ways to get on streamers. So I've mentioned sales agents. There's also distributors. So I'll share, Joanna, a similar thing happened with me. The Empowerment Project, my first feature documentary, we did the educational distribution. So schools, groups, organizations, corporations for 3 years before we went with a distributor and got it digitally distributed. And I'm glad we waited that long because we did lots of amazing things. We worked with sponsors, and the film was so special because it wasn't available anywhere else. And people were paying, good money for the screening fee, for us to be there as an appearance, for all the things. And we ended up working with Gravitas Ventures, which some of you might have heard of, as a distributor for the Empowerment Project. And it's been okay. They're all right. They take 30%, I want to say, of revenue, and they'll court you and get you really excited about working with them. And then as soon as you sign the contract, you really won't hear from them again because they have so many titles. They have hundreds and hundreds of titles. And so they'll go to a streamer like they did with us with Hulu. They went to Hulu with, I'm guessing, 10 films, 20 films, 50 films, and said, do you want all of these, or which ones of these do you want? And so we made a very, very small deal with Hulu for a year, just North American rights. And Gravitas didn't even tell us that the film was going to be on Hulu. So if you can imagine, just, you're perusing Hulu and you see your film and you're like, what? Why didn't I know about this? So like, that's how impersonal this can feel. And so I immediately emailed them like, this is amazing, great. What was the deal? What were the terms? Like, I'm like I'm such a nerd about it. Like, what's happening? And they're like, oh yeah, like it took forever for them to write back. And so we were on Hulu for a year and it was fine, but the money was so small. And like the impact that you're making, that I know you're making with A Fine Line, I promise is better and more exciting than being on any streamer, really. Because it just that feeling of actually impacting people, that you're making better money most likely than you will be making on a streamer, especially if they're not going to own all the rights to it, if it's going to be an acquisition. And so that was like a tough lesson. And then honestly, some of our screening fees were reduced or went away when we were on digital. Because imagine if you're a university and you're like, hi, how much is it to screen the Empowerment Project? And we're like, great, it's $500. And they Google you and they're like, wait, why are you on iTunes for $4? And you're like, that's totally different. Like, because it is, but they don't know that. So it's tough. You really have to decide, like, are you at the end of your road for educational? It's not necessarily the end, but it's like definitely going to shift. As soon as the film is available on digital, you're going to get those people that don't understand what an educational license is or all the assets that come with it, the screening packet, the discussion guide, whatever. They're not really going to they're going to see the same film on two platforms. One costs $1,000 and one costs $10. So that was a tough lesson as well with the Empowerment Project. So I've really kind of been there with like educational turning into digital. And, you know, to be honest, the money from digital has been so minimal and the money and impact have been so great from the educational market for that film that it's been really interesting to see how that all works. So,
I was just wondering, Gravitas, because I'm familiar with some of their projects. I know they have a very large library, so their model is that their business model really is that they sell in large bulk to.
It seems to be like some films that are released through Gravitas get what's called an MG, a minimum guarantee. So they might say like, we love your film, we're going to give you $10,000 up front. And then you have to recoup that $10,000 before you make another penny. It's like a book advance. If you get a book advance of $1 million, great, but like you're not going to see any more money than that, which obviously that's an extreme example, until that $1 million is made in sales for the publisher. So it's the same thing. But Gravitas with an indie documentary like mine, there was no minimum guarantee. You're signing on a 7 to 10 year deal, very long. You can try to negotiate it down. And it's anywhere from 25 to like 35% of revenue. And you have to be really careful when you sign those deals that they don't have unlimited marketing expenses, because that'll really get you. Because some companies will take advantage and say like, oh, well, we had to fly to this film festival to pitch your film. So you had to pay for our flights and you had to pay for our food. Like companies do that. So you have to put what's called like a marketing expense cap in your contract and say, you can't spend more than $5,000 on marketing this film unless it's cleared through me first. So like all of that stuff is negotiable. Always work with a lawyer when you're signing any contract. I'm not kidding, any contract. It's worth the money to pay a lawyer to help you to put out these fires that would affect you for the next 10 years. Like this is really, really important that you're looking out for that stuff. And that, what happens if a distributor dissolves? What happens if a distributor gets bought out by another distributor? How do you get your rights back? So it's stuff like that that's really, really important. So just because your film is done and you're exhausted doesn't mean you should just sell away your rights and be like, I hope it goes well. Like you are an active participant in your distribution strategy for sure.
Does anybody want to jump? We have a little under 10 minutes. Does anybody want to jump in with another question? Maybe we have time for one or two more questions. Anyone at all? Feel free. Okay.
Can I ask a question about creating a rough cut? Like how rough was your cut? Like, you had the footage already, I think, that you got from the Women's Voyage and whatnot. Was it just kind of like a sizzle reel or beyond, or did it flesh out the whole story?
When you say rough cut, if I'm sending my film to HBO, I'm calling it a rough cut, but it's almost done. Like I didn't have the color in or the sound. So you're sort of like saying like, it's a rough cut, temp color, temp music, temp sound. But it's essentially in your head, it's the story you want to tell, it's nearly done. Because again, they cannot fill in the blanks. They don't know your vision. Even if they've made 100 films, you still are not inside your brain and we don't know what you're going for. So if you get one shot at a first impression, I would, yes, call it a rough cut, but it should be like essentially done in terms of story at the very least. If you can get color, music, sound in there and essentially send a finished film, you know how painful it can be to watch a rough cut. It's hard to imagine what the filmmaker's going for. And even when you're like, ooh, I really want to like this, but something's not working here. That's again why in hindsight, I'm like, I wish I hadn't sent it, because who knows, they would have maybe, felt the magic even more if they had seen the full picture with color and music and sound and all that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Just one other question then, in terms of going from the empowerment project to, your next film, how was it raising the funds? And did you, I know you said you didn't end up deciding to work with a production company and it made more sense for you to do it on your own. How was the process, I guess?
Joanna, I wish I could report back that it gets easier, but it's been really tough all 3 times. I made 3 feature docs now. Only one had investors. My second film, Losing Sight of Shore, had investors. I didn't want to have investors on my third film, not because it was a bad experience and I paid them back and it all actually went very well ultimately. But having investors, for example, just puts like an extra layer of pressure and this need for it to have commercial success in order to pay back those investors. And my third film is deeply embedded in social mission. It's about sexual harassment, sexual assault. And so I didn't want to have that commercial element. I wanted to be able to do impact just like you, be able to share it in places in schools and have the freedom to do what the film needed rather than be like, we have to make X amount of sale of this platform. I didn't want that to inform the creativity. And also it just adds stress, having to be like, oh, there's people that gave me money that are expecting it back. Even though they signed a 42-page investor agreement that said, I might not make my money back. It's still, added some pressure. So I've done 2 crowdfunding campaigns, one for the first film, one for the third film. I would say that got slightly easier. And I don't mean easy. I just mean like I understood how it worked so much better. So I think by my third film, I felt like, okay, I know what the tools are at my disposal. I was able to get a grant that I had gotten before. So like some things got easier in that way, just like knowing the landscape, knowing what my abilities are in terms of fundraising, but it's always hard. I mean, I'm sitting here like trying to talk myself out of doing another project. It's like, it's so hard to raise money. But you can only hope that you're standing on your own shoulders of success. Like you know what it takes. I guess if anything, as you move forward with new projects, you know when it's right? You know when you're excited, when your heart is like lit on fire. And if it's not, then you're not going to go through it because you know how hard it is and you know how taxing it is and it's got to be worth it. Like every film or project that you make, you're just like, oh, is this worth my time? And so I'm certainly trying to do more of that.
You've had you're speaking of Losing Sight of Shore, it's been on transactional VOD like iTunes and then of course Netflix. Generally speaking, where do you think filmmakers will see a better return on a licensing deal with Netflix or a transactional VOD platform?
100% on Netflix. I mean, I would even just think about your own habits. Like I personally don't ever use iTunes or Amazon like transactional video platforms. Do you? Like we've got so many platforms to choose from now.
Never.
Having to get my credit card out and pay for a film. I mean, unless it's my friend's film or I'm like dying to watch it and it's the only place to see it. I mean, the return on a streamer is, exponentially larger. But I will say and it all tags back to, do you have a marketing budget of any kind? And I never seem to. For 3 films now, it's like your costs just get eaten up in production and distribution. And then it's like, okay, great. How much money do we have for Facebook ads? Oh, $10? Great. It's like, so iTunes and Amazon, like it's all about getting to that top 10. Like I really know very little about that stuff, but it's about getting those reviews up like any Amazon product, really. It's like getting positive reviews, 5 stars, the algorithms pushing your film to the top. I've never really played that game very well. I feel very fortunate that Losing Sight of Shore has a lot of organic, like people passing it along, being like, oh my God, have you heard about this? And then sharing it. So we've made some decent money actually on iTunes and Amazon, but a lot of that is word of mouth. I have spent literally $0 on marketing for iTunes and Amazon, and Netflix not a ton either. And we've done pretty well considering how little I've done to promote it. It's I wouldn't call it like a viral story, but it's very shareable. It's like, oh, did you hear about these 4 women it's crazy. They like peed in a bucket. Like people are like, this is nuts. And then they'll share it. And so, yeah, I want to say we've made like $5,000–$10,000 on iTunes and Amazon over several years. Okay. And it's always like a delight when I get my revenue report from them. I'm like, oh, that's cool. People are watching it. And now that it's not on Netflix, those numbers are jumping a bit because it's one of the main places to watch it. Right. So again, thinking about the long life of your film, like where are people watching it? And then, again, if it's the only place to watch it and you really want to see it, you'll whip out your credit card and you'll make it happen. But yeah, no, a streamer certainly, because you'll get that licensing fee up front or over time. It's a set licensing fee no matter how many people watch it. And transactional, it's like you're always trying to get people to watch it to up your numbers and to get more revenue through the door.
Right. All right. Well, Sarah, of course, a lot of this is about who you know and networking. So is there a way that our audience here can keep in touch with you if they have projects and they're trying to advance them forward, or they want the opportunity to try to get onto Netflix? If you could put it into the chat box so they could, if they want to keep in touch.
I mean, I am not a direct line to Netflix. Yeah. I do not. I work with a sales agent. That's my secret. There's no secret here. So please contact me if you have questions. I do consulting work. Cool. You can email me, but I can't get your film on Netflix. That's just not how it goes. Right. And just keep in mind, like I said, the landscape has changed a lot in the last few years. So I would encourage you to keep up with what's happening. I just read this morning that Netflix is getting into video games. Oh. So just interesting stuff like that, like keep up with the trends and try to position your film so that it has the most success in the marketplace. So a lot of it's timing too. All right. But yeah.
And if they contact you through your website in the subject, can they put Big Apple conference or whatever so they know,
Sure, yeah.
Where they're okay, good. So
I'm not inundated. It's okay, I'll remember.
All right, good. So yeah, hopefully, people will keep in touch with you and hopefully, you guys can, can discuss each other's projects and whatnot. Lastly, so Sarah has a book out now, a new book. And I'm wondering if you could just tell us a bit about it.
Sure, yeah. So last year when no one was doing anything production-wise, I was actually super pregnant all of the pandemic with my son. And I was really hungry to make a project and not able to do so. And I'm a teacher. I teach I'm an adjunct professor at different film schools. I do workshops. And I really wanted to share the knowledge that I've learned over making 3 feature docs, largely independently, getting on Netflix, etc. So my book is called Empowered Filmmaking: How to Make a Documentary on Your Own Terms. But a lot of the advice is truly universal to narrative films as well. So I take the reader through all 3 of my films. So everything we talked about today is in the book, and then some if you're interested in learning more about crowdfunding, grant writing, basics of camera lighting and audio, distribution, marketing, all of it. Soup to nuts, it's in the book, and it's very, user-friendly. It's just like this conversation. It's not like very high-level academic. It's like, here's how I did it. Why don't you try it? So yeah, it was really fun to write, and it's on Amazon, and it's like $30, and it's a lot of good info. So if you want to check it out, I put the link in the chat.
Cool, thanks. Empowered filmmaking, making a documentary on your own terms.
Yes.
All right.
Congratulations on the book. That's really amazing.
Oh, thanks. And I self-published, by the way. I've been trying to get this book off the ground for a long time, had a literary agent, all the things. And then as apparently is my thing, you just make it happen. And so when none of the publishers were interested, I was like, all right, cool, I'm going to self-publish. And that was super empowering too. So
good for you.
If you want to know about that, you can.
All right. Cool. Well, thank you, Sarah. And hopefully, everyone here will keep in touch with you and let you know about their projects and everything, and you guys can connect. So thank you, Sarah Moshman. Thank you very much for being here. And hopefully we'll see you soon. Thank you all for being here.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.